Welcome to our live sessions. Welcome to events by the Self Club. The Self Club is on a mission to create a more self-aware, emotionally intelligent, and socially conscious world. As always, one self at a time. Starts with me, starts with you, Matt, and starts with everybody listening right here. And my name is Samantha. For those of you who don't know me, Samantha Sacchi. I'm the founder of the Self Club, and I'm an educator and a coach and a facilitator. And yeah, this stuff that we're talking about now is my biggest passion and what my whole life revolves around. So very excited. And we have Matt with us. I'll let you.
Hey guys, yeah, so Matt Adams, and yeah, I've been a full-time coach for probably 3.5 years now, really working on this and specializing in emotional intimacy. Also working a lot of work on personal responsibility, but a lot on when is it appropriate and how do we get ourselves to feel our emotions more, and then obviously when is it useful to communicate that. So that this is a large body of the work that I'll work with my clients, and something that has been a real inspiration for me over the last probably 10 years, right? That's really really taken me on. So I'll be cool to share today with you guys.
Yeah, and I love these conversations between Matt and I love working with Matt because I think we complement each other quite well. Also in the experience we've had, right? So I've been a coach for also about 5-6 years, and when you study coaching, there's different ways to go about it, right? So Matt specializes in that emotional intimacy, while I'm more of like a results-based coach in terms of objectives and getting to where you want to go, an objective-based kind of coaching. So it's quite interesting to have that mix. And so guys, I'm going to put you in a little bit of context here, all right, before we like dive straight into the topic, because we might make reference to conversations we've had before. And I just want to fill you into like this world of emotions and what we're talking about. We've been talking about, first of all, how to feel our emotions, okay? Because we part from the base that we weren't really taught this in school, right? We feel all day and all of the time, but this navigation system that we have, that our emotions are, we haven't really learned, right? Like how to feel, what it means. Are our emotions true or are they not? Are they relative or not? Should we judge them, shame them? Should we change them? So we've been kind of just talking about that, all right, and how we have to actually teach ourselves to navigate our emotional world, all right, and what it means to feel our emotions. So in that, we've also talked about this like triad, which we've mentioned, all right, which is our emotions are our navigation system that allow us to kind of understand the world, update our map of reality, and understand our own needs. Okay.
Yeah.
We had a session on needs, all right, how a lot of life is about fulfilling your own needs. And it's our emotions that allow us to understand if our needs are being met or not. Right? This is just based, I'm oversimplifying everything right now for the purposes of context. And then with these emotions and these needs, we then kind of have this concept of boundaries. And we did do a talk on boundaries. And boundaries is that line where I end and the other person begins, right?
Yeah.
And this is important because boundaries will be a topic that we'll discuss today because it's quite relevant to what we should say or not. So that being said, Matt, and kind of putting, people in this small context, what does it mean to feel? Mm-hmm. What is feeling?
Yeah.
How can I feel?
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, the first idea is to understand, the purpose of emotion, right? And a lot of that is that internal guidance of whether we are doing well or not. And obviously, we all have an internal idea of what we need in our life, right? So our needs is to maintain our life, but then also progress throughout to our future, right? So emotions are very much our guidance system to, we feel good when we feel like we're progressing, when we're meeting our needs, whether that be the more basic needs of you're doing well, we're meeting those needs, and we're progressing. And when we feel that more negative emotion, like sadness, discomfort, or almost disappointment or shame, it's like that's a signal that either something that we're doing or something that's happening is not meeting those needs, or we're moving further away from those goals. So very much a guidance system to whether we should repeat what we just did or change something that we were doing.
Exactly. And you know, another point on that in this whole feeling and emotion spectrum is that the point of all of this is to have some sort of management over your emotions and not let your entire life be ruled by your emotions. All right. So it's not because you know, it's funny, Matt, with this topic, I have some people say to me like, oh, so I'm just supposed to feel, and then what I feel in the end. And it's like, well, that doesn't mean that you will become a slave to everything that you feel and just surrender, right? And if you're sad, and you just can't be here right now. No, we have to learn to feel that so that it doesn't own us. And that's just, it's kind of counterintuitive sometimes, but when we actually learn to feel and accept what we're feeling, it actually passes
right
quite quickly.
Yeah.
All right.
And this is maybe the point. It's like we can either respond from that emotion, which is like that emotion takes you over and possesses you, and you can really feel that in certain times. Like we talk about this often when we talk about anger. It's like, well, sorry, I don't know what came over me, right? I just I apologize, right? And that's where we feel like the emotion really took over us and we're just responding from that place.
Well, reacting, right? Not responding.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, reacting.
Exactly. And that's very much taking over us, and we're fully absorbed in the emotion. While what we're promoting more so is to say, well, you want to become aware of it and feel it and know that it's there, and then try to understand what it's trying to share with you so you can respond appropriately, right? And give yourself the best opportunity to make things better. Because often we end up making things worse if we're just reacting to our emotions rather than responding.
Yeah, and the reason we're talking about this is because the title of this session is, should I say what I feel or not? But how are you going to say anything if you don't know what you feel, right?
Yeah.
So it is so important first to feel what you feel, to know what you feel, right? And in those steps that we've taught, it's that notice it, be able to more or less name it, be able to accept it and own it, and knowing that it is yours and that nobody else put it there, that it is inside of you, it is your emotional experience, and then to let it be. But it's only after you've done this with yourself that then the conversation of bringing somebody else in can happen, can take place.
Yeah. And I think
ideally,
that's a really key one, right? Is to realize that, especially if we're not familiar and we're not mature with our own emotions, which means that we're kind of reacting from them. We're just kind of on an automated system, if you like, just acting out. Often we'll display emotions which aren't necessarily what we're experiencing. Right. So an often one, an easy one, especially for men, is we'll display anger when actually we feel sad. Right. So we feel sad, but we know that it's kind of inappropriate to show sadness. So instead we display anger. And if we're not aware of what we're feeling underneath, that's what we do. We just react from that place of anger. And it's often in the reverse for women, is that often they're feeling angry, right, and they would like to show that demonstration and say, hey, look, this isn't okay. I don't like being treated like that or something. And instead they internalize it and they feel sadness instead. Because again, they feel shame to express. So it's really useful to be aware of what we're feeling and being sensitive to that, so we know what we actually feel rather than what we're expressing to the outside. So because we want to be able to express what we feel in an appropriate manner.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why, you know, in the context, for example, of emotional intelligence, or I think all of life management, first you have to become aware and manage your own self. And then the second step is really becoming aware of others and managing your relationships. All right. So let's part from this base of, okay, I am responsible for everything that I feel.
Yeah.
I first have to take the responsibility for that emotional experience. I have to understand, name, and accept that. Yeah. Then the others come into the picture. I think it's
Right.
really important.
Yeah. And this is also to understand that it's cool because there are certain circumstances where we want to explore that, where we don't know what we feel and why we feel it. Right. And then obviously then it's helpful to have someone as a bit of a mirror to us to be able to help us understand what we're feeling. And that's where we'll really get into the crux of it today of, well, what should I actually do in these situations when I feel lost, when I don't know what I feel, or when I want to discover it, like who do I speak to and when do I speak to them?
And
Right.
do you
So
know
we'll
what
get into that.
yeah, do you know what I think about this as well, Matt? Like, I mean, you know that I believe every single person in the world should have either a therapist or a coach,
Mhm.
especially at some moments in life. But often, because we don't have these emotional intelligence skills, right? We don't know how to be coaches. We don't know how to mirror. We don't know how
Yeah.
to validate. We're desperately looking for that in our partner or in our mom or in our best friend, right?
Yeah.
So but they're not necessarily giving it to us, so we're trying to figure ourselves out with someone that doesn't necessarily help us do that. And that's
Yeah.
why it's so wonderful when you do have a coach. I mean, I've always done therapy in like periods of
Yeah.
my life. I've
Yeah.
always had friends that help me out, with this kind of things, like you as well,
Yeah.
that can help me understand what I'm going through, rather than give me a solution, right? Rather than just fix the problem for me,
Yeah.
rather than just shame me or tell me, oh, you shouldn't be feeling that way, or get your
Yeah.
shit together, or whatever it is that other
Yeah.
people might tell you.
Yeah. That's it.
So
And that's half the battle, right? Is figuring out, well, who in my life can I speak to about this when I need that kind of comfort, when I need someone to be accepting of me. And then we also need to know sometimes when to talk to someone who's going to say, right, come on, we'll like, forget your emotions for a moment. Let's get on with your work and so on. So
exactly.
there are different situations for different people. So yeah, for sure, it's nice to be able to have a coach who knows a little bit about that and is trained, because we all need to like stand on the shoulder of giants, right? We all need to listen to what's been done before. Someone who's been learning this for 30, 40 years is really useful. So
Oh, absolutely.
yeah,
So all right, we have this context that, we kind of
yeah,
talked about feeling, why it's important. Now, I think it's important, before we get into talking with others, in what situations, Matt, should we feel on
hmm,
our own? Like,
yeah.
to kind of like sit with what we're feeling and not express it or say it to other people.
Right, right. So that's the kind of context. It's like, well, when should I allow myself to feel this without expressing it to anyone else? Or when should I show that expression? When is that expression required for the situation to improve or so on? So maybe an initial example is to think of what easy ones, like if I'm going to go up on stage, right? If I'm going to go up on stage and I'm feeling really nervous and I'm a bit scatty and so on, I wouldn't necessarily want to stand up there and express that to the crowd, right? Because I'm there to serve a purpose. I'm there to serve them, to give them what they need. While if I express, oh, I'm really nervous, guys, I'm sorry about this, oh, I'll just take a few breaths, right? Then you're kind of using them to serve you, to calm you down, right? So there are situations where you want to be able to feel internally, right, and have your emotion felt and accepted and be okay with it, without having the need to express it to the people who are around you. Right? They don't always need to know what's going on for you. Sometimes you're serving a purpose, you're doing something for others. And another easy one would be if you're in a meeting, right? Maybe you've got your boss and a few other colleagues around and so on, and maybe you just remember something that you've forgotten, right? Or you remember an argument you had with your partner in the morning, right? And you start feeling an emotion, or there's a trigger of some kind, and you feel a certain emotion, and you're like, well, okay, it's maybe not appropriate for me to cry or for me to feel angry or to show that to the room, because it's not serving the purpose that I'm doing in that moment. And obviously on a personal level, those people aren't the people who are there for me, right? They're not the ones who are going to be okay with that and say, oh yeah, it's okay, you're feeling sad, okay, let's take a moment. It's like, they'll simply just shame me and say, what are you doing? Yeah, go to the bathroom and come back once you've cleaned yourself up, kind of thing, because it's not appropriate. They're not the people to be there for me. So that would also shame me in my emotions, right, for that experience.
Yeah, and before we get into the appropriateness, which is, one
Yeah,
of the main things we're going to talk about today, I do want to like make it really explicit for everyone listening. Did you notice that we're talking about feeling and expressing as two separate things? So
yeah,
you can feel something, not express it, and you're
Yeah.
still feeling it. You still have the right, you always have the right to feel what you feel. What you feel is never wrong. All
Yeah.
right. But expressing it is a different topic. Just because you feel something and you are allowing yourself and accepting it internally doesn't mean that you have to show it or express it. All right.
Yeah.
So, and let's put a bit of context around what expression means, right? What are forms of expression?
Right.
One that you mentioned is verbalizing it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah. So obviously we know that if we are quite knowledgeable of what we're experiencing, sometimes we can share that, right? So we can only share it verbally when we've already got a good idea of what we're experiencing, right? So then we can tell the other person, oh, I'm feeling a bit sad, or I'm feeling angry right now, or man, I'm frustrated, or you've done this and that kind of pisses me off, or we can communicate that with words. But the majority of the time we don't verbalize it, right? The majority of the time we feel, and obviously our body and our facial expression, right, is just expressing that all the time. And obviously sometimes we hide that a little bit, and we try not to show that emotion when we feel like it's not appropriate. And in other times we actually want to be able to express that so that the other person can understand what we're going through. Right? It's our emotions, either through verbally or through our expression, is a way for us to communicate to the other what our experience is. And thankfully we have very similar emotional responses and reactions, so that when we see an emotion in someone else, we understand what they're feeling, right? And we can empathize with them, right? And feel that compassion.
Yeah.
So
And
expression, either through your body, through your face, or through words, it's a way for you to communicate to the others what your experience is. And obviously the idea of that is to help them to adjust their behavior, right? Or to help you with the situation, so that you then come back to a kind of homeostasis, back to a peaceful or happy state, whatever you're looking for.
yeah, I love that, because in a lot of the studies that have been done about emotions, I love that all over the world, right? And regardless of culture, the main, let's say 5, 6 core emotions show up in facial expressions in the same way, right? So sadness will be like that kind of eyebrows up, and the
Yeah.
lip frowning, but that's everywhere in the world, right? So guys, we can recognize expressions of anger, like me just, right? Like, setting myself down or speaking a certain way, or my eyebrows getting a certain way.
Yeah.
Crying is clearly a universal expression of sadness, right?
Yeah.
Laughing can often be a universal expression of joy. Yeah. So there's that verbal, and then, as Matt said, facial and bodily expression of the emotion. So let's get into the appropriateness, right?
Yeah. Well, I was also going to share, well, why would we want to, right? Because what I'm thinking is that there's certain situations, or you see this in certain people, right? That either they don't do this, right? So let's look at what it looks like when you don't do it appropriately, right? When it's not working out how you want it to, right? One example I get is with my old friend Peter. All right. So for him, he would always share what he felt, right, with anybody, right? He would be at a bus stop and he'd share his problems about his flatmate with the person standing next to him in the bus stop, right? He would go into the pub with me, right? He would meet someone that he, for the first time, doesn't know the guy, and he'll share his deepest, darkest secrets with the person about himself without any shame whatsoever. But the other person would feel quite awkward, would be uncomfortable, and be like, it's really inappropriate. It wasn't good. Right? He just dumped on me his emotion. Right? So you've got the side of people that where sometimes we overshare, right? Or some people would call that like emotional dumping. Mm. I had another friend, and Chloe. She'd always speak to me, and every time we spoke, it would be about her problems. Right? And it would never be a reciprocal interaction. She'd never stop and ask me how I was doing. So, and nor would she ask me, oh, is it okay if I share with you like my problems? It would just be, you call up and then all of a sudden there's tears, and she's sharing everything that's going on in her life and all her problems. And sometimes you're like, well, I wasn't ready for that conversation. I just wanted a quick hello, how you doing? Or like, it's time, I've only got 5 minutes, and really that conversation deserved more time. So that's kind of one extreme, to say, well, why do we want to know when we should feel here, and how can we create that appropriate moment? It's because sometimes we can overshare, right? And they're like the examples that if you're standing in the crowd or you're about to do a speech and you share your emotion, that's again, you're oversharing. They don't need to know that. In the office, in meeting situation, again, you're oversharing. There's no point. You shouldn't be necessarily crying or expressing strong anger that's not appropriate to the meeting, right? If you're being triggered by something else, again, that's the time where you're oversharing and you're giving too much.
And then we have the other extreme, right?
Right.
Another extreme, which is, it could also be inappropriate, which is the like emotional withdrawal.
Yeah, exactly. You're withholding your emotion. So, yeah, a really good example. Well, one is my ex-partner. So this was my situation. And so quite often there would be something that happened within the relationship, right? She'd done something quite minor, right? But for me, it was a big deal. And often she'd say, well, what's wrong, man? I'm like, you should know. Right? And I would say to her, well, if you knew, like, you should know it was so bad. You should know what it was. You should be telling me and apologizing. And I would withhold what I was feeling and what I was going through because, maybe because of shame, I didn't want to express that, and maybe also to punish. So I was withholding that information and not communicating, not sharing what I felt. And that's something that I experienced as well within my family. Is my brother almost never shares what's going on for him. Right? So often he'll go through a hard time, and during those hard times, you don't hear anything from them. Right? And that's a really tough situation because you don't know what's going on. You don't know how. You want to be able to help them. You love the person, and they withhold that information. And one example was a client of mine called Hans. So he had a situation with his partner where he was starting to feel insecure when they were enjoying moments together, shall we say. And he couldn't get an erection, right? And during that time, rather than being able to express that directly to his partner, right, he would kind of shut down and show not interest. Right? He'd say, "Oh no, I'm not interested. I don't want to do it." So rather than being able to express to his partner like his nervousness and what was going on for him, right, that was shut down, and he withheld that information. And his poor partner didn't know what was going on. Was thinking it was her, that she'd done something wrong, that he didn't like her anymore. Right? And obviously that withholding is where sometimes the opposite happens, and there's a one-way system. Like only one is sharing how they feel, and the other one's shut down. Right? A bit robotic.
Absolutely, and I love to know and to share with everyone that both of those sides are inappropriate. Right? In the emotional withholding, it has a lot to do with what we've spoken in the past of feeling shame around what you're feeling, right? Like judging what you're feeling, and then feeling perhaps shame around expressing your needs or asking the other person for what you might like, right? If I'm feeling like, I think it happens to me, and I think to all of us, like to a lot of us, it happens when you feel like rejected. You know, when you feel like rejected, that you kind of like shut down, or you feel sad, or you feel like you're not enough, right? And it's hard to like express what you're feeling at that moment when you're so hurt and feel like the other person doesn't even, want you, right? Yeah, because it's and this is part of what we're talking about now. Like, guys, expressing emotion is so vulnerable, right? It's very vulnerable to actually express genuinely what you are feeling and why you think that might be.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, because a lot of that understanding, like what we feel, right, is linked to a need that wasn't being met. And if we have to express that need, we're showing a vulnerability, right? We're showing that we're limited in some way, and we need this and we didn't get it and we feel sad, or we need this and we didn't get it and we feel angry. And we're having to demonstrate that we need something, right? That we're not complete already, if you like. So we're always asking for help in those moments, and it's vulnerable whether the other person will help us, will give us what we're looking for.
Totally. And I think an important topic here is that some people, and I've had this in my life as well, like share to get rid of their own responsibility of the emotion, right? So like, you did this, right? And when you do that, I just can't help it. I feel like that, or you made me feel so. right? So when we're sharing our emotion or expressing it from a place of putting the responsibility of the emotion on the other,
Yeah.
clearly that is completely inappropriate.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's where we want to really take on that responsibility and say, understand that fundamental idea is that our emotions are based on our perception of an experience. Right? They are not created entirely by the experience themselves. And we can see that very clearly, that when two people are in the same place, enjoying more or less the same experience externally, but they both feel very different. Right? One person might be enjoying the experience and the other person feeling quite upset by the experience. Right? So hence the emotion is very much an internal thing. And if we can take responsibility for that and realize it's our perception and not them who are making me feel something, then that really helps. That's like a starting point for how to be more appropriate. We'll hopefully we'll explore that one later.
Yeah, and I think, I've done couples therapy before, and that's the base, right? It's okay. The base is you take responsibility for your emotions and your emotional process, and the other person takes responsibility for theirs. And
Yeah.
as long as we are thinking that it is the other person's fault that we are feeling a certain way, we're just going down a rabbit hole. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and I think one of the things I've learned the most is, how to allow myself to feel first on my own, so then what I express is useful. And I think that this is a lot of, for me, right, of the answer to the question is, okay, is what I'm going to express useful?
Yeah.
Does it serve a purpose that is going to help rather than destruct or make things worse?
Right.
Okay.
And that's really the foundation of what's appropriate and what's not. Right? It says you have to base it on, well, why the hell are we expressing it? Right? Obviously, we want to first understand why we feel it. Right? So that's our own internal idea, right? Is we're like, okay, well, I feel this because this happened and I needed that, and that's why I feel like this. Right? So you can have that kind of analysis inside, but then when you choose to express it or not express it, you're doing that for a reason. Right? You're serving a purpose. Either you need the other person's help, you need them to change what they're doing, right? Or you're looking for them to help you with an emotional, with an experience that's happened that's not including them, right? That you just want support, you want to be able to feel. But that purpose of why you're sharing is really key.
Yeah. And one question, when we said that sometimes we can just like feel, right, on our own, we don't necessarily need to express, but when is expression necessary? When do we like need to express something?
Yeah. Well, a lot of the time it's when it's directly caused by the other person, right? It's to say that if your situation, right, is frustrating you and the other person is doing something that isn't meeting your needs, right? And obviously if you're having a long-term relationship, right, it's not something that you're just going to experience once and it's gone and you're like, okay, that didn't matter. If it's something that's repeated, you need to be able to express that emotion to the other person, so that one, you feel like you're being heard and you're saying what you're feeling, and also so that with the hope that the other person will feel compassion for that and then adjust their behavior so that it doesn't have so much of an impact, right? And we see this all the time. I think it's like 25% of murders are done by somebody, either your partner or a close family member, right? And 75% of those come from the person who was passive, right? Who didn't say anything, who never shared what their problem was, right? So you'll be in a relationship, you're really passive, you've got a partner who's maybe a little bit dominant, right? And the passive person doesn't express, doesn't share, doesn't explain what's going on to them. And then all of a sudden they snap, right? Because there's so much resentment that they haven't been sharing, right, what's been wrong, and that they just don't see any future because it's not getting better. They haven't shared. So then they're the ones who are more likely, 75% of them are the ones who are passive beforehand.
That's powerful, and that reminds me of what I mentioned in the last live session, which are like that school shooting that there was in the US, right? Of these people that they're quiet, but they're feeling all of these things, but they don't have any sort of outlet for it, right? There is no like emotional reciprocity, which is that balance point, right? Where you kind of express what you feel, and then somebody is listening to you and perhaps, changing something, and there isn't that. So the only way that person can meet their needs and express their emotion is in that like radical way, right? Which leads to like murder.
And there obviously we're talking about the extreme circumstance, but you can also cut that back a little bit and say, well, how about just a conversation between you and your partner? Right? Is that sometimes the problem shared is a problem halved, right? Is that once you've shared it, you're like, oh, okay, at least I feel like I'm not crazy now, right? They understand, they see my point, right? I'm feeling this for a good reason and so on. I'm not going crazy. And just that expression to the other person can often help things out just on a personal level, even if the other person doesn't necessarily do anything about it, right? They're not there to help you. They're just there to be a helpful ear to listen to you. But within the relationship, I mean, you just think how many times a relationship breaks up because they couldn't really express how they felt, right? Is that maybe one partner was feeling anger and frustration or disappointment about some behavior of the other partner, but never really expressed it, or not enough, right? They may have shared it once and then stopped. Right? And then obviously the other person just continues on their behavior, not knowing how much hurt they're creating, if you like, by that imbalance. And then the relationship just breaks. And it's only like 2 years later that somebody writes a big letter to the other one sharing why they broke up, because maybe they didn't know themselves in the point, right?
Isn't that so sad that we don't really know how to be vulnerable? Because if we don't allow ourselves to be vulnerable, which is to express what we feel, so then we can kind of give a hint of what we need, right? That's a very vulnerable thing to do. Then there can be no love, right? Because if we're not, first of all, how can we love ourselves if we're not seeing ourselves? And that's the basis of self-love too, right?
Yeah.
If you're denying your own emotions, if you're shaming your own emotions all of the time, if you are not just listening to yourself and understanding what you need from life in any given situation, you're denying your whole existence. You're denying yourself. And that's already hard enough. But then the next level, right, which this is the recipe for love, is sharing that you have allowed yourself to be and experience, being vulnerable enough to sharing that with another person and allowing them to see you, them to see all of you, right? Your strengths, your weaknesses, your emotions, your good ones or your bad ones, right? And your needs.
Yes, exactly. And that's one of the key points. So to understand, like in a relationship, right, whether it be a friendship or a partnership, is like, why are you first attracted to that person, right? Usually you're attracted to, or you admire, or you're lustful of their qualities, right? Their beauty, their humor, their comedy, their style. Maybe they're good at something, maybe they're better than you at something, right? And you admire them, right? So you're attracted to them for that reason. But that's admiration. That's not love, right? So love is very much when you get to see the other person's vulnerability, right? So then you think, okay, well, the reason why life is valuable is because it comes to an end, right? Because there is an end point. Each moment is really valuable because you'll never experience it again, right? So the fact that we will die, and we could die, and we constantly need each other, right, to survive. That's what enables us to be able to be loved by somebody else. So that vulnerability is the key to the other person seeing our needs and then being able to give that to us, to love us in that moment. So vulnerability and showing our needs, or the expression of our needs, which is how we show our emotion, or whether we communicate that with words, that is the way that we're opening up an invitation to the other person to say, here, look, love me. And obviously that's where we hope that the other person will. Sometimes they don't, because they have their own issues and whatever else. Maybe it's someone who doesn't feel comfortable with that emotion, so they don't feel comfortable with your emotion either. Right? And that's where we get a bit of rejection. But the majority of the time, if we're in a close relationship, when we show a need, the other person is quite often there to meet it. They want to meet it if they can.
Yeah, if they can. And this is why the appropriateness is so important, because it has happened before, and maybe you guys have felt it, that you open up, you put yourself in a vulnerable state, and you share something, and it is not heard, respected, honored. It's maybe shoved to one side and you're left feeling like stupid. You're like, why did I share that? Actually, that happened to you, right? Yeah.
So I'll share a quick story. I don't know. And this was like a moment for my own like development to realize, oh shit, well there you go, I made a mistake still, right? So we were in a class, right, and we were given a task to share what our highest point was and what our lowest point was throughout the year, right? And I'm quite in touch with my emotions, and I'm fairly okay being vulnerable and sharing things. So I shared my lowest point, right, which was a very touching story for me. It was something that hurt, that I was very sad about, and maybe still a bit vulnerable around, right? And I shared that to the group. And at the time, there was 2 members in the group who were there. One of them was just kind of half looking at the computer, half playing their computer game. And I was like, oh shit, right? So I shared something really vulnerable with this person, and they just responded back with, oh yeah, that's interesting. Why? Right? And they just carried on playing their game. And I realized I was well oversharing, right? And of course, when it came to their turn, and they shared like their lowest point, it was something about the course that we were doing, right? It was the lowest point. It was like, oh, I didn't like this part of the course. And it wasn't anywhere near the vulnerability that I shared. So when I shared that vulnerability, the people who were there, they weren't able to, or maybe it was me oversharing and it wasn't appropriate. Right? And of course, I then felt like, I shouldn't have shared that, right? I overshared and my needs were not met. So, because when we share a vulnerability, we need the other person to show, yeah, some love to that, right? Because we're basically saying, hey, I need you to show me that it's okay for me to be sad right now, right? Or something.
Totally. Like that's horrible. It's happened to me too. Like when I'm sharing something, it's happened with
Yeah.
my close family members, either with my partner or my brother or my mom. And like you share something that's been difficult. Maybe you haven't told anybody yet, right? Or something you've been struggling with, because sharing what's difficult is often the hardest. And you open up, yeah, and you're like, hey, and the other day it happened, like, hey, I've been like really stressed, and then the person's like on their phone, you know, and you feel really dumb like for like talking about something that matters to you, and then you want to kind of say, hey, this topic is important for me, can you listen? But even that is vulnerable too, expressing that need. Hey, I need your like your full attention, but without it sounding needy or like demanding. Hey, like,
Right.
and sometimes, right, what I do, what I used to do, at least when I can't manage my needs and become aware of my emotions, is that then I get pissed off, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's just like, I just stop talking sometimes. And the other
Right.
person's like, oh yeah, what were you saying? And I'm like, no, nothing. Like, forget it
Right.
now. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
And where that clearly what right, in the correct expression of the emotion, what I should do is like, hey, I just feel like a little bit hurt because I was sharing something that, was like important. I felt like I didn't have your full attention. So it just made me kind of like, feel
Right.
sad.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. And
Yeah.
that's, times where we're all human, right? We might show more, right, more expression, show more vulnerability than what the situation actually was able to handle. Right. So whether it be my situation where I overshared with the group and the expectation that the group was going to be there for me was too high and they weren't, and that wasn't necessarily appropriate. So that's my bad, and saying, okay, well, that was my miscalculation of how much I can share with these people. Because I also have a desire to want to help people to be the leader, right, in showing more vulnerability than what they usually would, right? To show them that it's okay, that we're human, right? So I have that responsibility as a coach to lead the way, but then also to realize that, okay, well, I can still sometimes on a personal level take that too far. If they don't appreciate that vulnerability and see that I'm being vulnerable, then that's a miscalculation from me.
Totally. So let's talk about the usefulness, right? The appropriateness. So
Right.
there's 4
Yeah.
aspects, right?
Yeah, 4 aspects. So kind of appropriate place, appropriate context, so the environment that you're in, appropriate time, and appropriate person. Right? So that's really key, because what you're saying is, first of all, I mean, you obviously don't think this out loud, but that's what we want to be able to understand is, what is the purpose of me sharing this? Right? What do I need and what do they need? Right? So if maybe it's something that they're doing that they need to change, then I need to share that. Maybe it's anger from me, but I need to share that with the other person so that they know and understand that they've crossed a boundary. They've done something that wasn't okay, and I don't want them to repeat. Right? So they can adjust theirs, so it's useful for them. or maybe it's something that I need, right? So it's maybe I need to share with a best friend a challenge I had today, right? And I say, hey, can you be there for me? I'd like for you to talk, and I'm doing that for my benefit. Obviously, it helps the relationship for us to come closer, but it's really not about them. It's about me getting what I need, right, in that moment. So the purpose really sets up how much I should share, right, and with whom, right? So let's take appropriate place, right? So here's another example, right? Is that another friend of mine, so Peter, the same friend who overshared, right? He went into a coffee shop, right? And the guy at the counter says, yeah, how you doing? How's your day? Right? And he stood there and told him full out how his day was. Right? And of course, he's trying to serve the next customer, and he's just oversharing this whole time. And again, it's like, no, it's not the appropriate place. Right? You're in a coffee shop. You're surrounded by other people. You're expressing something that other people don't necessarily want to hear. Not the appropriate place. Right? Another one might be, it's not the appropriate time. Right? To say that, you're just on the way out the door, right? And someone says, oh, is it okay if I talk about this, right? Or the other way around, like they're about to go out the door and you ask them about something. It's like you wait till your partner's just about to leave and then you share something really deep and they're like, oh man, that's not the good time, right?
Yeah, totally. I've had that happen to me a lot. Like I'm, in between, I'm getting a glass of water in meeting. Like I left a meeting, I'm getting a glass of water. Somebody finds me in the hallway. And they're like, hey, listen, really quick. And they don't even ask me. It's like, hey, really quick thing. I just need to, and they bring this massive topic up. And I'm just like overwhelmed with like, wait, like, hold on, not now, please. It was the right person. It was the right place that we were at, but it was not the right time. Yeah.
Right. So, and then you got the appropriate context. And that's maybe the situation where I shared at the beginning. It's like you're standing on stage, right? And it's like, no, that's not the environment where you should share your experience, right? Or you're in a boardroom meeting, right? And you're talking about something and you have a memory of your childhood or something, right? And that's not the context to then nudge your best friend maybe who's next to you and say, and start talking about something irrelevant to the topic of what's going on. So the context of the discussion, right, is also appropriate. You wouldn't necessarily talk about a funeral at a wedding. Right? It's just the context isn't there. Like you don't go up to the bride and tell them how you've just broken up from your partner.
Yeah.
No, it's not the appropriate context, right? Is you need to have that environment who suits what you're trying to express. Right.
Yeah, I think the context is an important one because that's a great example we gave. I actually saw the movie last night called Crazy Stupid Love.
Okay.
And this little boy, he's giving a speech in his 8th grade graduation and he just starts like lamenting about how he thought real love existed, but now he realizes it's all fake and there's no such thing as a soulmate or true love. And it was, it was so inappropriate. And this is where the dumping comes in, right? He's just dumping all of these things that he's feeling and accumulated that he doesn't know where to place. And as soon as you get an opportunity, you're just like, wow, you kind of like vomit it out. And his dad stepped in and he's like, no, right? And he kind of brought it back into place. I think that the dumping, Yeah,
and then finally, you've got the appropriate person, right? And this was maybe answering some of your questions that you wrote in the boxes earlier, is that, like, who do I share with and how do I pick the right person to talk about what I'm going through? Right. So another one is like, okay, well, let's say I'm facing a challenge at work and I'm really pissed off about something, right? But it's not something that can change, right? It's something that's there, like the company has made a decision, or let's say you're not getting a pay rise, right? A simple example, right? There's no pay rises for anyone. They're having a bit of a hard time. That's not necessarily appropriate for you to go to your boss and to express how pissed off you are that you're not being, you didn't get that pay rise. Right? Well, maybe it'd be more, because it's not something he's going to change. It's not something you can do. Of course, you let him know that you're disappointed or so on, but the full expression is not really appropriate to that person there. You want to be able to express your disappointment and your sadness to someone who's going to be able to meet that need for you, right? Which is to let you have that expression and know that it's okay for you to feel sad. So let's take another example, is that you want, Peter again, right? So he overshared at the train.
Peter.
Yeah, exactly. Right? So he overshared at the bus stop, right? It's just, it's a complete stranger. In the pub, you don't express your deepest, darkest secrets to a complete stranger in that situation. They don't know you. They don't know your context, right? Your personality, right? And it's not appropriate for them to know that much about you. And something that comes to mind with that is that this idea that sometimes another person's curiosity doesn't deserve your vulnerability, right? So you quite often, like the person who overshares, right, or the person who never shares but asks all the questions, they're not the appropriate person to share something with, because they're not someone who's necessarily very respectful of that vulnerability. They won't appreciate the gift and the love that is, right? So I've certainly had situations where somebody else asked me a question and I shared, right? Like what was really there, and then they just cut that off or shamed me or judged it or criticized it in some way. And then you're like, oh man, well, I should never share that. Their curiosity to want to know what was going on for me didn't deserve my vulnerability, right? So picking the appropriate person who can both be there for you and also that it serves a purpose for them, right? That you're sharing it for a good reason.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think that leads me to something that's crucial. When you guys are thinking of talking to somebody, like think of who is this person and what is their personality like? What are they usually like? And how do they respond to vulnerability? That's it, right? Because if they're a person that's very withdrawn, if they've never shown you any signs of vulnerability, right? If they're constantly, I don't know, talking about others and judging or shaming them for how others feel, or even judging or shaming themselves, what does that tell you about how they're going to deal with your emotions and you opening up?
Yeah.
Right. So it's so important. And I think sometimes, like, you know, there's this, I think I shared this with you once. I was listening to a podcast of Oprah like years ago. And I remember her saying, why don't we listen when people show us who they are, right? And this is this concept that people, you know, like your boss or your friend, right? They show you who they are with their actions. Maybe they don't call you for 6 months, right? Maybe every time you share something, they make it about them, right? People are showing you who they are all the time, but we somehow have like this hope that they're not really like that, that they want to be better people, that they want to change, that no, I think he was just having a bad day. And we like justify their actions as if that's not what they meant to do. And it's like what Oprah was saying is like, no, they're showing you who they really are. Like, listen and stop deluding yourself. So what I mean by this is really think about the person you're talking to. How do they normally react, right? And the personality is so important. Is so important because often, like, I think one thing that we do, and maybe some people here relate with our partners in the context of romantic relationships, you know, I love Esther Perel. I don't know if you guys have heard of her, because she says how nowadays we ask from our partner what back then we used to ask from a whole village, right? So we want our partner to be our confidant and our accountant and our, you know, best friend and the best lover. And we want to get adventure with them, and we want to get trust, and we want like everything from the same person. And one thing that I've learned, for example, is my partner is not the appropriate person for me to like walk through my emotions and figure myself out. That is not the appropriate person because of his personality. My emotions affect him too much. So I can't just come in and be like, hey, I feel this and that, but I don't know. But then when you did this, it kind of made me feel like that, right? Because it's too, I have to figure myself out and verbalize out loud with friends in therapy, you know, and then come with a little bit of a more clear emotional expression to him, you know, for example.
And that's cool, right? Because that's highlighting that's someone that you love, that you're in a relationship with, and you want to maintain something, right? So it's something that's going to continue over time. So it's not that you want to fully withhold, right? And this is where we see that the two extremes have their difficulties, but we want to find some kind of centered point, right? Which is understanding, well, okay, if I look at the context of this situation, I look at the time, I look at the place, and I look at the person. What is appropriate to share? Right? So we're looking at that way, rather than saying, okay, well, this is what I need. Is it the right time? Right? And then you'd probably say, well, no, it's not. So then you maybe only share a small amount with that person.
Mm.
And then you realize, well, okay, there's more that I need. So I'll speak to somebody else about that later, right? At the appropriate time, place, context, and person, right? But right now with my partner, I'll maybe just share this little thing so they understand what's going on for me. So we have some relative relationship going on, but I won't necessarily display all of my vulnerability with that person because they're not in that state of mind or at the right time for them to be able to fully give me what I need or give you what you need in that moment.
Yeah, and if it's useful for you guys to ask yourself instead of, because I think when we use the word appropriate, for me, I feel like there's like a judgment, right? Like, oh, it was so inappropriate. I feel like judged or shamed about it. When I use the word useful, it helps me a bit more, right? Like, because if you think, is it the appropriate time, then it leads me to like theory. Oh, wait, is it appropriate? Is it not? Who, according to who, is it appropriate? But when I ask useful, I'm like, is it going to be useful to share it with this person? Is it going to be useful to share it right now? Is it useful to share it in the place we're at now, right? And you kind of think about the usefulness of that. And for example, for me, sometimes, actually, it's funny. My best friend shared this with me the other day. Her mom told her whenever she's going to talk about something important in the relationship, they always do it outside of the house.
Right.
So that's interesting, right? Because that's maybe their dynamic. But when you're outside of the house, you kind of have to manage your emotions more. You are more kind of like aware of what's going on, right? Maybe in the house, there's more craziness going on or more volatility. So you might go for a walk, right? And share those kind of things. But
it's kind of cool because you're creating neutral ground, aren't you? To talk about something. Like if you go to someone else's house, you don't quite have so much power about what you talk about, right? Or how the evening's going to go. While if you invite them to yours, they don't have necessarily so much control, right? Because it's your turf, right? So you get to control. While if you go outside, you've got neutral ground. You're both sharing like what you're experiencing, and
and so this concept of appropriateness, guys, and like usefulness, there's no exact right or wrong. It's not like Matt and I have the answer, this is appropriate and this is not at all, right? It's you have to know what's useful for you. And for example, in the case of being up on stage, sometimes it is useful at the beginning or at any point to show vulnerability and say like, hey, you know what? Like I do that a lot. Like, I was feeling a little bit nervous and you share a personal story, and that vulnerability helps people like relate to you. So that might be useful. Now, if you just have like a breakdown, if you like start crying and having a breakdown on the stage.
Brené Brown does that, right? She
Exactly.
gets up on stage and she says that some people feel like this, like me right now, right?
Yeah.
And she's expressing that to show vulnerability, to show that it's okay, because it's useful for the people. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. And so, it's important that you kind of navigate through the usefulness, but it is interesting when you're going to express something. Remember that it is necessary to express. So it is not appropriate to withhold everything, because remember that vulnerability is a requirement for love. So in all of our interpersonal relationships, love is not only present in a romantic relationship, it's also present with friends, it's present with family members. That vulnerability, and in a reciprocal way, is required. Now, the extent to which you share and which moment and how often, that is what has to be navigated in terms of usefulness. And sometimes it is trial and error, right? You can't like do it perfectly. You can't calculate it so that you will never be hurt and you will always be heard. It's absolutely impossible.
Yeah. And that's the whole point of this, is to go through that, to explore who is appropriate and who's not. And of course, all of that is constantly changing, right? One person you might share something with one day and they're completely distant and they've got stuff in their head and they're not there for you. While another time, right, you share the same thing with them and they're present and they're there for you and they ask you questions and you're like, oh, that was so cool. Right? So it's hit and miss quite often. And that's where we want to be sensitive to I share a little bit. how do they respond? Do they respond well? And then it's a case of, okay, well, then I can share a bit more. I can go a bit deeper. Do they respond well? Yes. Okay, I'll go more. Right? And then we can measure that as we go through the conversation. While if they're not present, so I'm sharing something with you, Sam, and then you're thinking about something else, right? I can tell. And that's where you, like, sometimes you had the passive aggressive moment where you're like, oh, forget it. Don't worry. I'll talk about it later.
Yeah.
And that's when you realize they're not giving it back. Right. But you could also do that in an internal way and say, okay, yeah, okay, well, I'll just share a little bit and we'll come back to that later. Right? And you might share that and say, okay, no, I was just talking about this, but is it okay if we talk about it later? Because it's not appropriate now. It's not the right time right now.
Totally. And I have that now with like, my partner is just like, hey, there's a topic I'd really like to talk to you about. I'd love to find a time this weekend. Because sometimes the time, guys, like requires both people to be in a certain emotional state, right? And it's like you said, sometimes the person does want to hear us. It's the right time, but maybe they're just not in the right state of mind.
Right.
Right. So that's when it's complex when you're dealing with two human beings, two sets of needs, two sets of emotions. Yeah. And it's that kind of being tuned into both.
And hence, that's why we're talking about this as an emotional boundary. Right? It's the difference between the other person, where they end and where I begin. Right? What do I need? What do they need? And it's always that negotiation. Well, can they give me what I need, or can they not, because they need something else first? Right? And this is quite often the way that we look at it. It's like the person always wants to help you, but maybe they need something else first. Right? And that's quite a cool concept to say, is when they say no, no doesn't mean no forever. No means they need something before they can say yes. And that's really helpful context, especially with your partner, is to say, well, maybe they need something. They need you to set up the conversation, right? So they know what you're looking for. They know what you need before you share it with them. Because I've had this very often, right? Where I've shared something with a partner and they didn't respond back how I needed, right? But rather than judge them, I'd say, oh, okay, I didn't let them know. Like I set a trap almost. Like I set them up to fail, right? Because I knew what I needed, but I didn't share it with them. Right. So hence what we can do, and this is really how we get into what we should do, is that when we really need something and it is the appropriate time, person, and context, we want to set up that conversation by letting the person know, well, I'm going through this. Is it okay if you just listen to me, or actually I might need a hug after this, or ask me some questions because I'm trying to figure this out. And you can ask them in advance what you need from them to serve you, right? To make that experience useful. Yeah.
So there's that, like asking for permission, right? Like, hey, do you mind if, right. Like, hey, I've had a lot on my mind. Like, do you mind if I just share with you a bit? Or, can I just walk through my emotions with you right now? Like,
and to answer like Nicole's question there was to say, well, what happens if you've got someone who's always calling you up and just dumping their stuff on you? And to say, well, that's a boundary, right? That's where they're crossing your boundaries and dumping their emotions onto you, and it's not the appropriate time, place, or so on for you. Right? So we need to be able to learn to say, oh, actually, can I stop you there? It's not the appropriate time right now. Can we organize a time later? Or maybe I can call you tomorrow and we can talk through this. Right? But it's being able to have that boundary to say no to somebody, right, when they're oversharing, or to ask them to share if they're withholding. Right? Is to say, well, actually, yeah, I can see something's going on for you, but you're not sharing it with me. I'd really like to know, just for my own understanding of you. Right? And maybe they share, maybe they don't, but that's the boundary. We need to be able to say no or ask for what we need.
And it's so important for the people that are like overly agreeable, right? The people that have trouble saying no because you're always putting other people's needs before yours. It's so important. I know there's a lot of you here listening to understand your own needs and recognize that they're just as important as the other person's. All right? Because if not, what you are doing is building up a bit of resentment, and that will grow over time. If you're always sacrificing the other person over you and saying, no, it's okay as long as they're happy, and it's okay, I can just change this thing. Oh, it's not that important what I had to do. Let me just, right? That builds up, and that is not contributing to your self-esteem, right? So it's really important. And so we can ask for permission, you said, right? We can request the person to give you that space, and you can also ask them even how you need them to be or to listen. That's a discussion that I've also had with my partner. Like, he mentioned the other day, hey, when I share, like, I would love to have like my space, like that time and that space to be just like for me. And then if you want to share anything with me about like how that made you feel, we can do it like at another moment.
Yeah.
Right. Because that person really wants to feel like they don't know what they feel. They need to walk through everything. And then if I make it about me or share how that makes me feel, it's like, it feels like he's not being honored in the way that he needs.
Yeah.
So I'm like, cool. It's good to know how I can be there for another person. And I think that we often expect too much from others. We expect others, right? Especially the people who love us, to just know how to deal with us. But we have to teach each other often how to love us. We have to teach people and our partner what we need, how we like to be listened to, right? What works for you and what doesn't. And it's hard and it's vulnerable. But through this, when you take responsibility for yourself, and other people do too, that's when that beautiful communicating and negotiating can come in.
Yeah. So here we've talked about the two ideas, right? Either you're in a situation and you're trying to figure out, well, how much should I share with this person at this time in this context, right? So that's you saying, well, okay, I'm in this situation, what's appropriate to share? Right? And that might be whatever situation. You're in a friend in a coffee shop, right? And you're like, okay, well, might be appropriate to share a little bit and share what's going on, but maybe not to fully express and cry on them and so on, because there's people around and it may not be appropriate. Right? But maybe another time, right? Another context, you can figure out and you're like, okay, well, now it's maybe more appropriate and I can share a little bit more, but I still can't fully share. So one is, you're in this situation, what do I share in that situation? Right? So that's where you can kind of run through and figure out for yourself what would be appropriate with this situation. And then the other one is, well, okay, I now know what I need. How can I give myself the best opportunity to get what I need? Right? And that's where you set up the situation and you go to and you ask your friend, say, hey, can we call tomorrow night? Or can we meet up and have a chat? I'd like to go for a walk with you and talk through some stuff, right? Or you call your coach and you say, hey, can I have a session this week? I really want to talk through this problem. Right? And you're actually giving yourself an opportunity to be able to fully get what you need. Right? And obviously you can have a go, because at the beginning, you may not know what you need. Right? And that's really tough. So sometimes you have to ask for something and you're like, that didn't quite hit the spot. Okay, how about this? Can you say this to me? Right? Or can you give me a hug? Because I think I might need that. And then you're like, oh no, it didn't really help. Or right, you figure it out, right? Because we're not perfect, right? We're still quite immature about understanding what our needs are. But that's the other context. You've got to say, okay, well, if I have a good idea of what I need, how can I set the situation up to give me the best chance at getting what I need? Right? And that's with the right person at the right time, in the context which fits it, with a place where other people are not around and I can fully receive what I need.
Yeah. And it sounds complex, and it is. All right. And I do want to leave you guys with that takeaway of, when you're going to express something at any given moment and you're doubting it, remember two things. One, like we said before, vulnerability is a prerequisite of connection. All right. So withdrawing all of the time and not saying anything all of the time is not really an option if you want to maintain that relationship over time. Yeah. All right. And second, is this going to be useful right now with this person?
Yeah.
Just keeping those two things in mind. And if it's not, but you keep saying, oh, no, it's not useful now, and it's never useful, and then 3 months pass by and you don't find the useful time, then you got to maybe just stop withdrawing and take a risk, right? And do it, like Matt said, a little bit first, test the waters, right? Ask for the permission, set up the waters, right? And make sure that you're not just like going over and like dumping. And another thing that I wanted to touch on is that we can sometimes express emotion on our own, all right? So emotion doesn't always have to be communicated with another person. And I've been discovering now certain like embodiment techniques to actually express emotion by ourselves. And it's been fantastic and really liberating, because very often I don't know what I feel, but I know that maybe another person might not help me either, or I don't have the person to help me with what I'm feeling.
Yeah.
And I talk to myself a lot. So I talk to myself a lot, and I know we see this as a sign of crazy people, but it's quite the opposite. There's actually studies that show that people who talk to themselves a lot are the ones that are most self-aware and emotionally healthy.
Yeah.
Um,
To a certain extent. But
Depends.
that's the point, is to say that if you've got the relationships that serve you, you can speak to someone else. If you're isolated and you're alone and you don't have somebody, then saying it out loud is probably the only thing that's going to keep you sane, right? So you see this with a lot of homeless people, is that they don't have somebody to share with, right? So they just walk down the street speaking out loud, right? And it's actually their way to maintain some sanity, because if they didn't kind of share that outside and see the responses from people, they wouldn't know whether they're like being really crazy or not. So that external feedback is useful. So hence, if you don't have somebody, at least express it to yourself. So you're kind of saying it out loud and you're like, oh, okay, well that makes sense. That's okay. Right? Or you're like, oh, no, that's a bit crazy. Maybe I need to think about that a little bit more.
Yeah, exactly. You can see new sides of yourself, and there's people that have more of a need to always be expressing. Yeah, and there's people that don't have that need, right? I'm a person that needs to express a lot. So I'm often just like, seeing things, and I might say something, and I'm like, okay, Samantha, that was a little bit crazy, and I'm just having that. And there's also physical ways in which we can express, and that can be things like crying by yourself, having like a nice, good cry can often get you in touch with what you're feeling, and with certain emotions that maybe you have more difficulty accessing. And that goes for anger as well. So there's this place actually here in Melbourne in Collingwood that like you throw plates like against a wall. Yeah. And we've
smash stuff.
And you've often told me as well about like men and this like chopping wood kind of thing, and that expression of like anger, right, through a physical way. Like I've learned also through this other course that I'm doing, this technique of just using a pillow and standing up and like slamming down on the pillow. Right. And it's things that just help you get in touch with what you might be feeling and express it in a different way that is on your own. And maybe that when you learn to deal with that on your own, then your expression with others is usually enhanced and improved.
And this really comes back to that fundamental point of saying, well, do you understand and are you comfortable with what you feel? Because I know that there's situations where I haven't felt comfortable with a whole group of emotion. Right? So for me, anger was something that was very challenging for me, because I had a challenging upbringing with my mum where there was a lot of argument. Right? So either there was passive or explosive anger, right? And we would hurt each other, right? Through that, whether it be physically or verbally, right? We would hurt each other, and then it would be painful. There wasn't a healthy expression of anger. So hence, I then grew up kind of being a bit scared of my own anger and also a little bit scared of others. So that's where you can do these therapy sessions, or you go to places where you get to express it, where there isn't hurt, right? Where the other person isn't being hurt by it, or you're not being hurt by it. That's where therapy is awesome. You get to share your expression, you get to share how you feel, or you get to live it out, to stimulate it in you, to know you can feel it without it like overpowering you and creating painful situations.
Exactly. And that's it. Like, I love that you said that right now, because when there's such an accumulation of hurt and resentment, it's very difficult to have conversations like the ones we're saying, right? Where one person is just like, hey, I feel this and this, and I think I need this and this. And the other person is just totally receptive and is saying, hey, and I've had that happen, right? Like somebody shares something and you're like, what? How can you say that if you've been doing this and this? And then the other person will just blow up as well. Yeah. So it's really important. Like, again, the person that caused the emotion is not always the appropriate person to explore and feel your emotions with and through. All right. We often have to go somewhere else.
Sometimes you may need to explore that. So if you're not so mature in understanding yourself and being able to express it well, then sometimes you might need other people to explore that, express that, understand that, figure out what you need to ask from them. And then you go back and you ask for what you need and you let them know what's happening. Because again, you've got to have the two sides, like withholding the information, which means like, well, okay, they did something that hurts me, but I'm not going to share it with them, right? Because they're not the appropriate person. That might be withholding, right? So I feel vulnerable. They said something that was maybe hurtful to me, right? So I'll go away and I'll speak to someone else and I'll share that sadness with them and I kind of get what I needed from another person. But then that continues, that repeats. And that's where we get the situation where you get relationships that break up. You get ones where there's fights, right? Where it actually goes physical because you just blow up because they're continuing to do that. So withholding is equally as bad as when we overshare with somebody and dump on them and they're not there for us. So sometimes we can put ourselves in a situation where we hurt ourselves by sharing with someone who's not appropriate. And hence we can also hurt ourselves sometimes by withholding it completely and not sharing it, right?
Yeah.
Which also usually means we don't feel it either.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. And you know, another way to also figure that out, because it's so different. It's so much more useful when you, again, go to your coach, your friend, your therapist, you figure yourself out, right? And you understand what you need. Because that, again, that doesn't mean, even if it's your boss, that doesn't mean that you have to withdraw and then continue to tolerate something you fundamentally disagree with, right? Or that he keeps hurting you or disrespecting you and that you have to tolerate that. Not at all. But you do have to kind of figure it out, sort it out so that you can communicate it in a useful way. And sometimes for those of you who don't necessarily want to coach or go to therapy, or it's not something, journaling also really helps, right? So writing, whether it's talking to yourself out loud, right? Or actually writing. Like I've been writing since I'm 13 years old. And I write to figure myself out, to understand. When I can't figure myself out and I'm going around in circles, I sit down to write. And I just dump it out because we just need that space, guys, where you're not going to feel judged and where you're not filtering, all right? Where if we want to actually express it or, you know, go to a way that it's useful, we're going to have some sort of calibration so it doesn't become a dump. And sitting down and writing helps you figure yourself out, helps figure what's going on, because nobody here, I think, is like Buddha yet, you know, where you know exactly what's going on and you divide it and you don't get triggered by anything. It's tough stuff. So yeah, so Matt, we got to wrap up. I do want to take a look at everybody's questions and right now.
Guys, write down your questions now if you want anything answered in the next few minutes.
Yeah, I just want to, before we go to the questions, well, I want to tell everybody thank you for bearing with us and going through this conversation where we went through a few points. In case anybody does log off, I want to just tell you guys about 3 things that we have coming up, which are really cool. So first of all, with Jess, my friend from Archleys, she's starting a 14-day journaling challenge. All right. This is all free, by the way. So it's a 14 days where you will be sent a journaling prompt. So like a question every day. And you just have to sit for at least 3 minutes a day and write on your own, in your notebook or on a sheet, whatever. All right. And then at the end of this 14-day journaling challenge, we'll have like an event. And it's all about reflecting on these like Corona times and these periods of like isolation and what has happened and what we have felt in the past few months. All right. So that's really cool. Then on June, and that's the event is June 6th when we culminate the 14-day challenge. The challenge starts on June 6th. All right.
Awesome.
The challenge starts June 6th. Cool. So June 14th, Matt and I are doing another live session like this one, which I'm really excited about too. And it's called What is Courage Without Vulnerability? All right. So I'll just say that. It's very interesting, but a lot of what we talked about today too. Okay. And then on the 21st of June, Matt and I have a workshop. This one is a paid one where the workshop is where we get really hands-on, and it's a group of maximum 10 people on how to express emotion, the guided experience. All right. So yeah, we have these 3 things coming up. I'm going to put this on the chat now. And now let's get into questions
Yeah.
and answers.
Yeah, and I saw a few things on there, like Sebastian, you mentioned that, yeah, certain forms of yoga can be really useful to be able to express what you're going through. And quite often that was why it was created, right? Is that often yoga was created early on was because the young boys who were trying to practice meditation couldn't sit still, right? And there was this physicality that had to be expressed. They had to be able to feel their body before they were able to actually sit down and be calm. So getting into your body is a huge part of the process of being able to feel. And so that's definitely awesome. Any form of exercise where you're moving your body, expressing, and as Sam, you were talking about, like getting your physiology to create the emotion that you need to feel, right? Because sometimes we need to be able to feel and express to let that emotion out, right? And sometimes we don't even know why we feel it. We're just feeling it, right? I had a situation, maybe 3 or 4 months ago, where I listened to a song in the shower. And for some reason, all of a sudden, I just flooded with tears, right? And of course, often men feel a little bit uncomfortable crying, and thankfully I had music on and there was no one around. And it was because I didn't understand what the hell was going on or why I was feeling. But just tears came and I just cried and cried and cried, and good, proper kind of belly shaking crying. And it was so nice. That was just from me kind of being up, moving around. I just started to dance. I was in the shower in a vulnerable moment, but yeah, I just started to dance in the shower. And then all of a sudden these tears came out. So moving our body and being able to do exercises and so on promotes the physiology, promotes the emotion to come through. So that can be useful, right? And obviously the other side is then being able to write, to think, to journal, to express, to talk. And as we talk, sometimes that stimulates the emotion in us. So it can be both ways, right? Both what we feel can stimulate our physiology, and sometimes what our physiology can stimulate what we feel. So they're beautiful ways for us to be able to express and feel without necessarily understanding it at first.
Totally. And I think it's fundamental because we can't, I mean, feeling is a physiological thing. Emotion is a physiological thing. So if we're just trying to feel our emotions in here, right? Like we often just go around in circles. All right. So it's really nice to make that body mind connection. And yeah, like I've been feeling so much for the past few weeks, and I'm not sure why. And I'm in this process of like, okay, feeling the different emotions, figuring out what that means to me, what it is I might need to change, you know? And it's just a process. And both stillness and movement can aid in that self-awareness, which is the most important skill we have to develop to be able to become aware of our own emotions.
Yeah.
Cool. So let's look at the other questions happening here. Let's see. Surely the other methods are more about the experience. Okay, this one. Yeah, exactly. Dating another coach. It's still
I just read that one as well.
hard work. We still, oh yeah.
So, and that's the point, right? Even coaches who have been specialized in this or working on this for years and years and years, they're still having to go through the same challenges themselves in their own life. So I would say be wary of any coach who says they've got their shit together, right? Right. So even as your own coach or as a coach yourself, you still need to be able to show that vulnerability, express what's going on. It's still hard, even though you know all the theory, right? Actually going through it can be just as challenging for someone who doesn't know anything at all. Like just doing it for the first time. So yeah, and we talk about this, Sam, too, is that sometimes we'll share different situations. It's like, man, I've been a coach for 5 years, but I feel like I'm just figuring this out.
Yeah. and it's funny because I mean, I guess any human that says they've had it figured out, it's like not only a coach, right? But anybody, because we're always changing. And life is we're being put into different circumstances that show us different parts of ourselves, and we discover different triggers, and we're evolving, right? So this is part of life. And I love to remind you guys that life, for some reason, in the West, it's painted as this linear process, like linear, like a graph, like it only gets better, and we're supposed to be always improving. But in a lot of the Eastern practices, like life and concepts are cyclical, right? Kind of like the seasons. It's not like the season. No, you always go back to spring and then winter and then you go back, right? And that is how life is. The emotions will never go away. They will come in waves, and you will just be better equipped. You'll have a better sense of your own self-awareness, and you'll have better tools for when that happens. But there are things in life like emotions, like challenges in relationships, difficulties that are what make life life. That is why we're here, to grow and evolve. And it is our emotions and the ups and downs that help us do that.
One of my coaches actually shared this once, to say that the problems never go away, right? Right. So no matter how good you get, you still have problems, right? Whatever it is, your problems are just better quality problems. Right. And what we mean by that is that maybe at the beginning, it's maybe something a bit small and petty and so on, and you're struggling with this small thing. Right. And of course, that's a problem for you, and that's difficult to express and to share and vulnerable and so on. But then as you get better, right, then it's the next level of expression, or the next level of intimacy that you want to build with your partner. And that's then vulnerable to share. Or maybe you have money issues at the beginning, and then you get better with your money and you have more money, but you still have a problem to what to do with the more money. Right. So a problem with $1,000 is not the same quality as a problem to have with $1 million. Right. Sometimes you like, I don't know what to do with my $1,000, or I don't know what to do with my $1 million. They're both problems, but one of them maybe is a nicer problem to have, maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. And remember, for me, I had this talk the other day in the support group that I have, and they asked me, like, what do we do with how do I get rid of the problem? And it's like, for me, the problem is the way.
Yeah.
The problem is the way. It's the fact that you have a problem, that life is being like, hey, something is not working here, and it directs your attention to that, and it is through there that you'll come out on the other side. But it's not the avoidance of problems that will get you anywhere.
Yeah.
So yeah, and so there's a lot of things here, but if anybody has a question that has not been answered, you can go ahead and copy it down again, and because I kind of looked through, I think we did answer almost
so there
everything.
was one person who shared that there may be more of the person who withholds, who doesn't feel comfortable to share, or generally is a little bit less sharing of how they feel and so on. Again, that would be a situation where we actually feel a lot of shame, right? So the person who doesn't want to share what they feel, and maybe they don't even think that they feel it themselves, that's usually someone who's gone through experiences where they were taught through their life that it wasn't okay to share and it wasn't okay to feel. So anyone who's a little bit shut down, I would really heavily recommend to speak with someone who's comfortable with their emotion, so that when you feel brave and you finally do share something, you've then got someone who's very accepting and loving and caring and understanding to receive it. Right? So then you're actually creating a situation where you can learn to feel and know that it's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is why I don't think I could have lived my life or gotten to where I was without a coach and therapy. Like, there's just, and I think we're all quite complex, but I'm very agreeable, and at the same time, I'm a little bit like neurotic in the personality trait. So that means I'm very sensitive. All right, I'm very affected by things, and that's why I've had to work on myself so much, right? Because I didn't want to be a slave to the world around me. I felt bad saying no, and every like a little comment from somebody could ruin my entire day. And I just didn't want to live like that, so that's why I've been doing so much of this internal work. And it's so much harder when you try to do everything by yourself, guys. And this is, I know I've said this every single talk, but I won't get tired of saying it. Remember, the myth of self-sufficiency is BS. All right. You are fully responsible for your life, but that doesn't mean you have to do everything on your own, and that you shouldn't rely on anybody. That is so far from the truth, and it's unrealistic. You just need to know who to reach out to and when, so that it's useful. But you need other people to understand yourself and to be happy
Mm-hmm.
and to manage your life. All right.
And we talked about this a few weeks ago to say, well, like, in what situations do you need somebody present with you in order for you to heal what's going on for you, right? For you to understand. And a lot of that is shame-based experiences. So shame is the emotion that is a social experience. It's a social emotion. You feel shame when somebody else shows you or sees you doing something wrong, right? So that obviously that required somebody to shame you in order for you to experience shame. Otherwise it's guilt, right? Guilt is coming from your own personal guidance. Shame is when it's somebody else. So to heal shame wounds, you require another person for you to be able to, again, express what that emotion is or what that experience was, and not have the shame returned, right? Is to have that experience again without the shame. So you sometimes need somebody to heal what's going on. So there's definitely, and what you said there's no such thing as an island, right? No person is an island. We all need other people. We are social beings. We need to interact with we need to share. So, and this comes back to the question from Beth earlier, is to say that what do you do when you're a little bit afraid of your partner's reaction, right? Of how they're going to respond, and whether they will respond appropriately to you or in a kind way. And Samantha, you've had the same situation. Sometimes you're like, well, my partner isn't necessarily the appropriate one to speak to at that time. And then maybe later on, once you've understood it a bit better, you can then come back to them and share a certain amount. And you also have a responsibility for that relationship to grow. Right? So you want to be able to share what is manageable within that dynamic. Right? So what that person is capable of experiencing and being present for. So that's the appropriateness of the time, place, context, and so on. So sharing what is possible, and you try that, right? You test the water, you share something, and then you ask the person to be there for you. And if they are, then great. You then can, maybe the next time you can share more, and you grow that relationship. Well, sometimes you have to understand the limitations and say, well, right now it's maybe not appropriate to share what I'm experiencing because I'm not sure enough yet about myself and what I feel to be able to argue that with them. Right? Because sometimes they might counteract that. Right? They might try to say you're wrong, right, for sharing what you're sharing, and their reaction might be strong. And you have to be able to stand up for that sometimes and know for yourself. And you've had like social proof from other people that, what you're feeling is okay, and you definitely need to share that with your partner. And it doesn't matter if they respond badly, it needs to be shared anyway. Right? So that's those situations I've made that sometimes you have to face it and share it with them because they need to know your experience. And then sometimes if it's more of a healing thing for you, then you share what's appropriate for their level of their level of maturity in that emotion, I would say.
Totally. And to kind of close up this topic and, start tuning out, I've had clients, friends, and in my own experience where, at some point, only a third person, like either the relationship ends because you can't meet your needs and you can't even express them, right? Because they're constantly met with anger. So you keep shutting yourself down, right? So what happens? Either you learn how to express those things, or you shut yourself down and the relationship has to end at some point, or there's a third person, a therapist, right? Somebody that comes in and kind of sheds some light so that each person can take responsibility. But the truth is that there's so much inner work to be done in our society today for us to have healthy, functioning relationships. All right. So many relationships are dysfunctional. And as they say in the school of life, like, we're so emotionally immature. There's a lot of taking of responsibility that we need to do for our life and for our emotions to really have better relationships in the world today. So well, let's wrap up.
Cool.
This was juicy. I think, again, we could talk for like 5 more hours about this, but I hope that everybody had some key takeaways in terms of what you're responsible for, right? And what is useful when expressing something to somebody or not, which was the key of what we talked about today. And please stay in touch. We're on everywhere. So LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, for all the events and kind of reminders, because we're often posting reminders. And if you ever want to chat to us, we're always answering questions and helping you out. because that's really what we're here for. All right, just help us create a little more functional world to live in.
Well, yeah, exactly. Whatever that means. Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you so much for tuning in, guys. Big hug, big kiss, and hope to see you in our next events. If anybody does want coaching, let us know. We're available to. I don't know if you're taking clients right now, Matt.
Yeah, I've got one space available at the moment. So yeah.
Okay, I thought you were pretty full.
Option, yeah.
Somebody actually asked me. I think I'll let them know later.
Cool.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. Take care. All right. See you soon.
All right, guys. See you
Thanks
later.
for all your comments. Take care.
Ciao.